Hi, Brian. Afraid you're the first person in. We've got nothing to talk about yet. Oh, Jason. No, there should be a button, Jason, where you ask to join. Go. So, Brian, I didn't realize I was going to invite you to join the chat there. I don't know how that happened.
Oh. At least we can see the faces of all four people in the room.
I mean, Brian, you should be aware that we are looking at you, and
you could turn his camera off, I guess.
I mean, I could actually do that if I want to. I feel a bit mean.
You want to kick me out?
Yeah, Brian's our roving reporter for One Nation Under Whisky.
Do you know what was really bad? Is I was sitting on the Elements Filer session thinking, how late can I move over to the session that I'm supposed to be doing? I mean, would it be rude to be 5 minutes late for my own thing? 5 minutes late.
How are you, Ollie? How are you, Jason?
Yep, Joshua and I were messaging back and forth. Good, Brian. Good. How you doing?
Do you want me to?
There's nothing happened. There's only four of us in the room. We've got nobody to talk to besides ourselves.
Yeah, we may have overrun on the other one, which is problematic.
Yeah, the other one is still happening. They're guessing which bottle has the most phenols that didn't originate from peated barley. Just as it was getting super interesting, I'm like, damn it, I gotta go. It was a fun session though. I was enjoying it.
Yeah, we were busy messaging back and forth. It doesn't look like Katie's wrapping up here. Are we meant to be in a different room? And then we came and found you.
Yeah, I was expecting her to start doing this, and she didn't do this. And I said, well, maybe it is a different room.
So you're still in Cornwall,
no,
Ollie?
I'm held up in High Wycombe in my house.
All right.
Yeah, I've just still got Cornwall in my brain. Your internet for being in London is terrible.
Yeah.
Do you live in a distant corner of London? Oh, I know that you do because I've shared a taxi.
Two aspects to that. One, I don't even live in London, so I live quite far away now. And two, my wife used to work at St Paul's Cathedral, and they couldn't get super fast broadband because they were next to the BT office, BT Openreach, who control all the lines in all the country, and BT Openreach refused to put in super fast broadband into their own office unless someone else would pay for it.
Right.
Huh. Right. That sucks. And then now they've just got a personal vendetta against your wife, no matter where she lives.
I'm hoping it's going to be okay now. Everyone's kind of going to bed, so hopefully, there's no children using the internet, or child in my case using the internet. So.
So what's everybody drinking?
Yeah, I'm hoping
Well, I've got choices. I brought this because I thought that was appropriate.
That is appropriate.
Look at us.
And then I did a wild card. Jason said he was doing Imperial, and so I figured, well, you know what? I'll do an Imperial as well.
Yeah.
But I also brought.
Oh, here we go. Here, Julie's
Yeah.
here. Okay, now we
Okay.
can start. Now we just got real.
So for those people joining us and expecting to see One Nation Under Whisky come and chat to me, we're also chatting to Brian, who's broken into our session. Don't know how he did it. It's magic.
He says he's not good with technology. He's lying. He just hacked his way right in.
Evil genius. So what do you want to talk about?
I have no idea, boys. I thought we would natter about your podcast and independent bottling in the US versus like being a US independent bottler who's buying Scotch and bourbon and the challenges. And then I'd talk about how miserable it is having to sell to you lot, with your stupid taxes and all the rest. That's where I was going.
Taxes, tariffs.
We just talk about some whiskey while we're at it.
Yeah, we did have. Yeah, we had somebody on our members only Facebook group the other day who was from the Netherlands, and somebody had posted some pricing from an American retail store, and the guy in the Netherlands had said, "Are those prices usual?" And we were all like, "Those prices are really good." And it was just like, "Oh, how can that be?" And I said, "Oh, that's the 3-tier system." On top of your system, went away, and then his next comment.
Not wrong. Is he just frozen for me?
No, I'm frozen for everybody.
Okay.
Oh no, I don't know. Oh no, it's not my internet. You're kidding.
Yeah, no, I think Jason is frozen in time.
You know what that is? That's called karma. Yeah, make karma man's internet. Use your own.
Did he come on here bragging about how great his internet was compared to yours? Throwing it in your face. Brian wants us to compare single malts of Scotland to single cask nation. All right, he can see us, and you know what, Jason? Maybe if you refresh your page, you'll come on bright and shiny. Why don't you give that a go? Hopefully that was good advice. There's a good chance it might not be. Oh, there we go.
Oh, where's Brian gone?
I don't know.
Oh, maybe I did.
That's okay.
Okay. Well, hopefully Jason will be back. Technical issues. We now have like actual people watching us, although they all either work with us, for us, or are Sam Simmons, which is pretty much my entire life. I'm either communicating people I work with, you guys, or Sam Simmons.
It puts in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine I sell much whiskey to outside people outside that group. So.
So Jason, you were talking about pricing regarding American or independently bottled whiskeys for the American market.
Yes. And while I have your attention, I am going to say that on Friday, my internet every 10 minutes, and it got down to about every 8 minutes, would just flat out shit the bed. And so I hold no hopes for this being consistent for the next 90 minutes. So if I lose you, just talk amongst yourselves. I'll be back in due course.
Well, I have some East Coast Elite wireless here. So my wireless is going to do much better than yours.
As you've done for 10 years, you can pick me up when I fall down.
So pricing, American pricing, and how it's all screwed up because of the 3-tiered system. I imagine the
Yeah.
11 people watching us, they may not know what the 3-tier system is.
Yeah. So if you lose me, just give me a thumbs down and I can stop talking, and then you can talk among yourselves, okay? So the 3-tier system, you come in with an importer, you move on to a distributor, and then you make your way to retail. Consumer purchases from retail. And so if you imagine each piece of that taking, a margin, some level of profit at each step, and then imagine a 25% tariff on top of that. And, you go from silly places where on one hand, you can be offered a cask of whiskey for a very reasonable price, that by the time you actually sell it to a consumer, it's astronomical. And our friend in the Netherlands just couldn't believe his eyes that we would have, what was it, a $300 42-year-old Port Dundas grain whiskey, that over here $300 for a 40-year-old grain is cracking.
It's a great
cracking price. And then for the guy in the Netherlands, he was just like, ee-oo, 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 ee-oo. And so it's, what are you going to do? It's the nature of the beast, and we all live accordingly. You're not seeing double. This is it's casks all the way down. I can show you my heart tattoo as well. So
that's your 3-tiered system.
Yeah. So guys, going back a little bit, because you guys are always interviewing everyone else, so I'm going to ask you questions because I think that's the way we should do this today, just for the fun of it.
I like that.
For those people who are in the chat who don't know you, which is probably
we can have a conversation while we drink.
A person, like Adele probably does. Yeah. I know that because Adele works with me, so she knows you should be looking up the site before I said you should get these guys on. One Nation Under Whiskey is a podcast where wonderful and not so wonderful people get interviewed about whiskey, other things. Can't believe you do other things to Betrayal. How did you under whiskey?
It was an interesting thing for the both of us because, Jason and I have we have a few meetings each week, but on one of our Monday morning meetings, say that 3 times real fast, we both of us came to one another with the same idea that what if we do this podcast thing? And Jason was coming to me with that idea. I was coming to him with that idea. And, there's a lot of really good whiskey podcasts on there, but we didn't know of any that tried to, at least at the beginning, we tried to focus a bit more on independent bottlers and the independent bottling side of things. But as you can imagine, that segment of the whiskey industry is quite small. So we ended up branching out after that, branching out from that. But the idea was just to have an industry conversation. It's the conversations that we have all the time when we're visiting distilleries or meeting with someone in production or an ambassador, and we want to just have those geeky conversations. We just wanted to record them because for us, it was a blast. And our hope was that our recorded conversations for people it would be a blast for them as well. And, it seems to be doing pretty well. We've got some good listenership all around the world, which is great. And to be honest, and Jason, please disagree with me, but at least personally, I think the podcast is the most fun thing we do right now.
More fun than bottling whiskey?
Well, when it comes to bottling whiskey, there's so much about that part of the business that from the standpoint of a punter, they just don't see all of the pain in the ass stuff that goes on for bottling whiskey, for getting casks from one warehouse to the bottling hall, to print, you can't print your labels because you need to know the ABV of the cask, but you don't want to take the ABV from just a random selection. You want to take it from when it's been bottled. And, there's all of these ins and outs of the bottling process and, the logistics of getting it from cask to bottle that could be a pain in the ass. Once you're actually selling it and you're in front of people and you're talking about the whiskey and sharing why you fell in love with it, why you finished it in this, all of that stuff is fun. So what's great about the podcast is we get to avoid all of the annoying shit and just do all of the fun stuff every week. Just have those great conversations.
Just need to get big sponsors so you don't have to bottle any whiskey, and then you could just do the fun stuff. Is that right? That's basically what we're saying. Advertising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds horrible as well. Yeah. That sounds miserable. Unless Elixir wants to sponsor us, I'm more than happy to discuss that. More than happy.
So it depends on who sponsors us.
I can send you.
Is that why Sekinder just entered the room? Yeah.
I can send you the sponsorship in whiskey only.
Sponsorship portion.
All payments from Elixir done in liquid. That's how we work. Actually, I say
That's
that.
fine.
I did actually pay once. I did once pay a photographer in just purely in whiskey, and afterwards, he originally thought it was a really good idea, and then he was sitting there looking at his many bottles of whiskey, and went, "I'm never going to drink all of this. What have I done? I need the cash. I'm actually bankrupt."
Yeah, no, you can sponsor us in Isle of Violets. We will accept it.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, so we did a bottling release a few months ago called Isle of Violets, which has a very expressive label, shall we say, expressive packaging. It was a parcel of Isla single malt whiskey, of which there's a few out there. Like I'm completely open about this. There's a few bottlings of this liquid, so it was clearly we didn't put that back. We were sold it as Isla single malt whiskey from 1985 around mid 80s. That's been finished in cognac casks. We can't tell you what it is, but it'll be clear when you get the sample. I think I opened the sample, didn't put it in the glass, put the lid back on and went, oh, it's 80s Bowmore. Put it down here. Then went back to it later. I have to say the first thing I thought was, Joshua and Jason are going to like this. That was my first thought. I know who'll like this. So anyway, we decided to bottle it. We bottled it as Isle of Violets, and we put a label on the front to show people what it tasted like. That was the idea. And if I'm brutal, I am not the biggest fan of that style. I am not a lover. I understand it. I understand why some people do like it. It's just not my thing. And I used to think that it was all awful. And then I realized there were people like you, FWVP perverts, is that what you call yourselves? That's a group, right?
I prefer the term fetishist.
Yeah, that's the better term.
So anyway, we've bottled that. I find, are you finding it harder to come across your pervert whiskey now, your fetish whiskey these days than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago? Or even standard for more was perfect.
Yeah.
Well, there's your answer, Ollie.
You guys are much better at this interviewing thing than me.
Well, from the perspective of just a whiskey consumer, you don't find 80s Bowmore in bottle anymore. There was a time, I would say even 5 years ago, I would find a bottling here, a bottling there. 10 years ago, and you'd find them all over the place, and that was heaven for me, because I do love 80s style Bowmore. Most of it. Some of it can get like horribly disgusting. I'll break out a bottle in a second and show you the one I'm talking about. But nowadays, you so rarely see it. We did a 1989 Bowmore last year, and then of course your Isle of Violets that just came out. I think there was maybe one or two other 80s Bowmore bottlings from last year, but what we're finding more than anything is that the price has just gone through the roof. And it's not the fault of anyone, you know. I'm not here saying Isle of Violets was too expensive. I think it, comparatively speaking, is actually a really good price compared to some other bottlings. But you know, with Sam Simmons on here, yeah, well, I bought a few of them. You know, but with Sam Simmons on here, you know, I remember Master of Malt when they released their 1982 Bowmore, the 26-year-old. And I think that is to date my favorite Bowmore of all time. And it's 80s Bowmore. It's just delicious. I wish we could find more of it.
Well, there's a stockpile just waiting for you guys. I mean, I'm glad you exist, because otherwise no one would buy it. So it's, I'm slightly taken aback how many people exist. There you go. In terms of like the bottling side, so you guys, obviously your podcast, you're doing lots of interviews with managers, independent bottlers, chancers like me, you in your car, and scare the life out of. Still one of the surreal experiences of my entire life. Do you use what you're learning through that to help the other side of your business? Do you use everything you're learning every day? Where are you? Shall we replace you?
So you mean, are we using the knowledge we get from our interviewees to help inform how we run our independent bottling company?
Yeah, kind of. Not the actual business, but the whiskey side. And is it a motivator? So if you're learning from storyline, etc., are you using that in terms of how you're looking for cars, or what you're selecting, or what you're trying to bottle?
That is quite interesting. What do you think, Jason? Can you think of an instance where that's come into play?
I don't think we internalize it quite as much as that. I think Ollie assuming that we plan things is a nice compliment, but there's definitely an aspect to it where the industry writ large, it's a wonderful discussion, and it's wonderful learning more about the industry writ large. In terms of what's around, what's in the market, I don't think we've quite gone in that direction. Would you, Joshua? But again, because to me that just sounds like planning.
No, I wouldn't, and I think it kind of gets me back to my original statement, where for me the podcast is just fun. Like I almost don't even want to use it to influence anything we do from a business or work standpoint. Like I really compartmentalize those conversations, and just I refer back to them, and I'll listen back to episodes. Like, for instance, we had a conversation with Dr. Kirsty McCallum recently of Glen Murray, and she was going into the production methods for grain whiskey, for single grain Scotch whiskey. And it was the first time I had ever heard that process be explained in such it was both in depth and very digestible at the same time. And, you know, it's just nice to return to those to make sure, am I remembering that right? You know, if I'm going to be doing a tasting or something like that, well, nowadays on Zoom, no, I guess in a way I do use it a little bit, right? If you're presenting a single grain Scotch whiskey, you want to know what you're talking about. And so therefore go back to the conversation. So I guess in subtle ways, the answer is yes, but for the most part, I try to compartmentalize.
Keep everything separate. What would you say in terms of all your interviews, excusing the one with me, was interesting. You've been going for quite a few years. The most fascinating person you've spoken to.
Wow.
I'll give an answer.
Okay.
I'll give an answer on this one. When we sat down with Anthony Wills at the Kilhoman distillery, like literally a day or during Fashiel, but not the Kilhoman day.
Mm.
And we sat with Anthony for an hour, and Anthony didn't hold back. He talked about things that they've done wrong in due course, things they did right, things he learned from, changes that he would make. The level of honesty in that conversation with Anthony, I thought was absolutely fantastic. And for somebody who could have been brand facing, not Anthony's really that type of guy, but for someone who could have been brand facing, he was just happy to sit and talk. And this is kind of the whole point of the podcast. He was just happy to sit and have the type of conversation he would have with us, whether or not we were recording or not recording or just sharing a dram together. And that to me really spoke to kind of the ability of the podcast to convey meaningful information and industry level information to the listener.
Cool.
Hmm.
Josh, you got a different answer to that?
One of the difficult things with being in business with Jason is that for the most part, we just agree on everything. And so if someone asks us a question, we have to provide different answers. It either makes my job harder or his job, depending on who goes first. I think for me, one of the more eye-opening episodes was actually the second time we had David Stirk on the podcast. And I think that was the first episode of our second season. So just about 2.5 years ago now. And what I enjoyed about it is it was the deepest dive that we had done on independent bottling in the history of independent bottling and how the whole damn thing works. And one of the reasons I love it so much is not just personally for me. I thought, the information was fascinating, but we had found out that there was another independent bottler who has an American team here. And the guy who runs the team had said, I'm using this episode as an education tool for my sales reps. They have to listen to this so they have an understanding of how the industry works. And that felt really, really good.
I mean, on that, so you guys obviously have a very unique perspective on this, having your independent bottle label anyway, as well. And you've been involved when you set up the podcast. It was largely about independent bottling. That you've been in whiskey since what, 2003, 4, 5, around there. Time getting really into the
in mid 2000s for me.
Yeah. Obviously, I've seen it change quite a lot in that time. How would you say independent bottling has changed for you in terms of not just what the stock looked like, because it's a lot easier to buy old stock, but the kind of companies and how the companies changed?
Jason?
Yeah, this is the conversation that we have with Mark Watt, and I know that you're very friendly with Mark as well, where you've gone from a period where independent bottlers couldn't give away their whiskies to independent bottlers themselves having cult followings, and I don't think there was any or is any more of a cult than Mark Watt, and that was CULT, Ollie. There's no more of a cult than Mark Watt, who's actually about to begin a session I was going to sit in on at 3:00, but that's by the by. And so the fact that people would actually follow Mark around from Duncan Taylor to Cadenheads now to his own brand, I think really speaks to the evolution of independent bottling. And I remember when I was just getting into independent bottlers in the mid 90s, it looked to me like total cheap rip-off product. And, you know, that was a huge mistake on my behalf. And I would say a big difference that I've seen is the things that independent bottlers were putting into the market in the 90s was phenomenal. And the fact that so many of us either slept on that, or you've got the rise of, you know, whiskey fandom in the early part of the 21st century, and people weren't even around to enjoy what was happening at the end of the 90s, is absolutely fascinating. And I think you all said it in your main stage on Friday, which is, you know, independent bottlers in the time of boom are, you know, pains in the arse for producers. But then during quiet or downturns in the industry, independent bottlers are there propping it up. And so the question that we've continually got is, what do the next 5 years look like? What do the next 10 years look like? And how do we prepare ourselves to take advantage when that boom just softens, when that bubble just softens? You know, what will the market look like then? And will independent bottlers still have these wonderful cult followings? And certainly the thing we can talk about with the nation in the United States is just the sheer level of support we have is mind-boggling. It's absolutely phenomenal. And now launching into UK, Europe, rest of the world, we're now saying, so yeah, we're these two guys from America who have a really good following. Would you like to support us, please? And so there's always the new challenge. There's always the next wave to this. There you go. I think I gave you 15 answers to your good question.
You're not bad at the fancy questions, Martin.
Joshua, fill in the gaps.
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting being on this side of things, where when I first got into whiskey, you know, right, you'd follow, how is this person's 10-year-old, how is this person's 18-year-old, and then you go down the rabbit hole a bit more and you discover special editions, and then there's this thing called single casks, and then you go down deeper and then you find independent bottlers. And then once I got into independent bottlers, then it was a whole new world for me. And what I find so interesting, to get to the heart of your question, which is, how's it changed since you've been paying attention to it? At first, I just simply didn't understand how independent bottlers got stocked. And so I would just be going from shop to shop to shop. I'd be looking, you know, oh, is there a signatory imperial? Is there this? Is there that? I didn't know that independent bottlers are basically offered large parcels of casks from brokers. And when this person is bottling a linkwood, well, this person's also bottling a similar linkwood. And I didn't understand how that worked. And once I did, that helped me to start feeling out who I thought my favorite independent bottlers were. Like, let's see how their linkwood is compared to their linkwood. And so that was kind of fun and interesting. Just from a consumer standpoint, on a business level, the thing that I find so interesting is, seemingly when I first got into whiskeys, there were far fewer independent bottlers then compared to how many there are now. It seems everybody has an independent bottling company of some manifestation, and that's really kind of surprising and a bit worrying to me, to be honest.
Well,
I don't know why it's worrying, but I
was going to say,
worrying how
is not room enough for it?
Yeah, just so here's my concern, right? The more bottlers you have, the more chance you have of potentially not great stock being put into bottle. Because another thing that I found out is, unless you have a really good relationship with a broker, and you're a new player in town, there's a good chance you're going to get stock and not have a chance to taste it. And now you've purchase that whiskey, and you can either put, if the whiskey isn't how you expected it to be, you can either put it into a cask, re-rack it, or finish it. Meanwhile, you're sitting on a lot of money, or you can release it now, and maybe it's subpar whiskey. And when I think about independent bottlers, I picture them, and this isn't me saying bad things about distilleries themselves. You know, distillery-owned bottlings are wonderful, and I've got tons of them up here. But the independently bottled whiskeys just seem to be the creme de la creme. And to me, that's a reputation, right? And you can tarnish reputations with the more potential subpar casks being out there, just because you've got more independent bottlers out there, and compounded by the fact that the majority of stock being offered independent bottlers is stuff from refill casks that need work. And so it's just this sort of piling issue, and it concerns me a little bit. It may be unfounded, but I think I may be wrong, but I think it's founded in some educated guesses.
And Chanel raises a perfect point in the comments, which I think dovetails beautifully with what you're saying, Joshua, is Chanel says the US needs good education on indies. And to your point, if you're a US consumer beginning to explore the category and you get a bad bottling, it may very well turn you off from the rest of the category, right? Why would I continue to trust this category when that didn't work? And I think one thing that we've always talked about, and again, you all talked about it on the main stage on Friday, is that for the most part, independent bottlers are very friendly another, and oftentimes buy bottles of the other. My single malt of Scotland sitting right here, right? I think it really speaks to, right? Right? It really speaks to us all supporting one another so that our little niche of the industry is as strong as possible. Yeah, I just put my Duncan Taylor back on the shelf.
Right.
Right. And so if we're not all taking care of our little portion of the industry, a newcomer, an incomer could easily screw the pooch and flood the whole boat. And that would be a shame, and it would be a mistake. It would set us back.
One thought.
Yeah. Cheers, Aaron. Good.
One thought I had about that was, it's really, there's a term. It's very easy to rainbow the past, right? We do that a lot with whiskey. You only ever talk about the great bottles. I've never, or the really bad bottles. Those are the two things you're going to talk about. You're going to talk about the great experiences or the terrible experiences. I completely get what you're saying about too many independents and the chances of being released. In some ways, when I think back to when I started in the early 2000s, and you had Double Line, Adelphi, Berries, Secunda releasing casks, there was a lot of stock, and there was a lot of really good stock, and a lot of it was very old, and it was really interesting. However, I went on an auction the other day, and I was buying a few bits and pieces, younger whiskies from kind of 2004, 2005, and I've opened them, and they were pretty meh. They were okay, nothing amazing. But chances are that probably all out or sold at the time. It was probably a lot of hard work to sell, but eventually, and it's not turning up because on auctions, because no one cares. There aren't many people searching out old 12-year-old bottles of Glenrothes, bottled in 2005. It's just nobody's seeking that whiskey. There's no collectors desperately trying to find that bottle. So some part of me thinks that there is room, sadly or happily, for a certain amount of dross in both standard bottling and independent bottling. There has to be, because there is a certain dross. I guess the only question is, do you think that with so many independent bottlers, you're likely to get more of it? And is that the concern? Because in reality, in the bad times when whiskey when whiskey was tough, there's just as many casks available, right? Probably more, and being involved somewhere for something. So it's not that the whiskey today. There are people possibly bottling rubbish casks, and back then there's nobody bottling rubbish casks. The reality is, fewer people, and those few people bottle some amazing stuff, and they bottle some probably pretty alright, pretty normal, some even not very good stuff. I think one of my first memories at Whisky Exchange was being told if I could sell a bottle of done glass, and there was some kind of prize. And I asked if I could get a sample, and they said, "No, you don't. That won't help you. That will not help you with this challenge. This is that's why it's a challenge."
So can I pivot, Ollie? Can I pivot you to go along with what I just poured into my glass? Okay, so you're talking about such and such a thing being a challenge. One of the things that you mentioned on Friday is blending and the world of blending. Obviously, for independent bottlers, there's such a key portion of the business is sourcing casks, selecting casks, sampling casks, so on and so forth. But then with Portiskeag here, and I've got the American 110 proof. Is that still US only?
US only.
110 proof.
Going to South Africa.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Makes
75
sense.
CL bottles. I hear you. So what are the challenges of blending Portiskeag?
Pretty minute, if I'm honest, Jason. It's blending Kalila. The easiest job ever.
I'm not going to get.
I'm pretty sure Diageo don't even have it. It's when everyone is out of the blending lab at Diageo and they're like, well, we need to make something. Get the cleaner in and tell them to do some Kalila. They'll be fine. I mean, so it's not a tough job.
I know you're modest, Ollie.
The struggles of that kind of thing is a bit said earlier in terms of understanding the stock you're buying. Like you just don't get the sight that you expect. Certainly, I expected enthusiast. You just don't. That doesn't really exist. So it's that, and then adjusting your expectations, I guess, when you're buying casks and then getting samples and how you put them together. I think when we're coming up with new stuff like Portiskeag 12-year-old Autumn, I'd still argue because of the styles of the liquid we're working with, it's a relatively simple job, but it's certainly the offspring. It certainly comes down to trying to have an idea in your mind. I think that's the thing that I strive for, don't always get, is to have an idea of what I want to make before I make it. And that's a bit about ambition for me, because I think when I started, what we used to do, or what I did, was we would just put good whiskies together, or you'd have a whiskey that wasn't so good and you'd try and adjust it, right? And then liquid first, basically, like work with the liquid, and then made something good, we put a label on it and sell it. And in some ways that's very safe, right? It's a really safe way of doing it because you know the liquid's good, and all you have to do is work up story, label, marketing and stuff later. Every marketer I've ever met told me that's the wrong way around, because it involves conversations where they're like, well, how do I sell it? What's special about it? I'm saying, well, it's whiskey. Probably not.
Master salesman.
But, nowadays, I do try more and more. Certainly, Portiskeag is probably one of the more extreme versions. We have a conceptual side to it. We sat down and wrote down what we wanted Portiskeag to be, what we wanted it to represent. Because at the end of the day, it's a brand name, it's a label name, and it should have its own identity. Whereas, and there's a difficulty there, and that's where independent bottling is kind of an odd thing. When you're an independent bottler, your identity is you choose a cask of whiskey, right? So you guys, as in the First Nation, I'm buying into you, and as I happily do. as a distiller, your identity is your distillery. So, you know, your Lagavulin, or you can read over the Prig, and this is our identity, this is where we are, and these are our USPs, this is what we sell. As a label name like Port's Cake, you're suddenly somewhere between the two. You're no longer just the guy choosing the casks, and the guy choosing the casks at Port's Cake does a good job. I like those. And I don't have a distillery, so I don't have that identity. So we spent a long time thinking about what the label meant to us. And I guess more specifically to myself and to Spinder. Where we ended up was elegant Isla, right? Elegant fruity Isla. Wanting to get people to drink Isla, wanting to get people to understand that Isla whiskey wasn't just peat. And bear in mind, this was kind of coming off the back of that whole Supernova, Optimal kind of battle of peat. And it did feel to me as a customer that the other customers were just so obsessed with phenols, and I thought Isla is more than that, and that motivated me to think what stage should be more than that. And so the only struggle now, or the challenge now, is when we look at casks.
Live.
Uh-oh, did we lose Ollie?
I have lost Ollie. Oh,
Yeah,
no, there he is. There he is.
Oh, no, there he goes. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
So, yeah, with like 12-year-old Autumn, we knew we wanted it to be autumnal. We knew we wanted it to be for this time of year when it's a bit colder, it's a bit, you need something a bit richer. But I still need it to be elegant, right? It still needs to be pretty, because otherwise it doesn't meet my brief. And it's really tempting when you're talking about autumnal winter whiskies to go and just put everything in a Oloroso cherry butt and make it taste like apple arapona, or something else equally fat and heavy.
How much autumnal is coming to the US? Is autumnal coming to the US?
It is. I can't remember.
Joshua,
you probably...
I can't remember either. About 75,000 cases.
Oh, okay. Do you think I'll be able to get a bottle?
No, nope. Everyone but you.
Pre-sold.
Ollie, I did have a slightly deeper question about the blending aspect of Port Ascaig. Now, you say that it's quite easy, but I would imagine where it gets difficult is creating that consistency from batch to batch to batch. Now, granted, you have a single distillery you're working with that has a very consistent spirit style, but do you ever run into any snags where you've got to really pay attention to how you're constructing that batch so it's not far off from the previous?
I'd say the only time that really comes up is when you're bringing the cask together for like 100 proof, 110 proof, and there's a cask in there that shouldn't be, like we've had in the past, and I mentioned this a few times earlier. We've had sherry hogsheads being delivered instead of refill hogsheads, and obviously that would cause a problem, and you've got to know that will happen. That's why we go and look at all the casks. But actually, one of the positives about being a small business and independent bottler, and like as an independent bottler, when you're doing a single cask, you don't worry that the last Ben Nevis that you did tasted the same as this Ben Nevis. In fact, that's the joy of it. They're going to be different. Well, I kind of see us exactly the same, right? 100 proof will change from batch to batch. We do about 3 batches a year, 2-3 batches a year, so each batch will be slightly different. And actually, moreover, the more time I've spent drinking different whiskies from different distilleries, I've discovered that all the big distillers are batchy, pretty much. Diageo are pretty consistent across the board. But you'll, like anyone who knows Lagavulin will tell you there are periods of that of 16. Like there are times where it tastes of certain flavors, and if you try Lefroy 10 or Bowmore 12, they're really batchy. Ardbeg 10, I'm drinking Ardbeg 10 at the moment because for me, and I'm not just saying this because he retired yesterday, but I think Mickey's done an unbelievable job with the spirit. And I think the 10-year-old, which is his 10-year-old, he made that, is drinking as well as it ever has. Even back to the days in 2007, 2008, when it was mainly like 17-year-old whiskey, I think today it's a really good 10-year-old. So batch distinction exists in Scotch whisky, even for the companies who don't talk about it. The great thing about being a small company is, okay, I don't write it on the label, but if someone ever asks me a stand, I'll say, yeah, it might be a little bit different. There'll be little changes. The main thing is to try and keep the style the same. You know, I always think back to selling a Springbank 10-year-old in the shop, and someone would ask you, what does this bottle of Springbank 10-year-old taste like? And you'd be like, it's probably oily. It's probably, there's a good chance it's smoky, and there's probably these notes. And they're like, you don't know exactly. Well, it could be anything. I mean, you just don't know. It's Springbank. I know it will consistently be good, and I know it will consistently have these notes, but each batch will be different, and that's the joy of it. That's the knowing that's the joy, and then being able to explain that to the customers the joy. So I definitely don't see my job as trying to keep exact consistency. That's your Johnny Walkers and your Schillers, and those guys are pure geniuses. I mean, they really are. What they do is beyond. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
You started out so
That's
modest,
great.
and then we got him to actually answer the bloody questions. Good. Bloody English modesty.
So on that blending, I'm going to open something because I only ever open bottles of whiskey at home when I've got friends, right? And because of COVID, which has been a great fun experience. I don't have any friends. It's not they've died. Don't worry.
It was true. True after COVID. It's true during COVID. Ollie has no friends.
So this is.
That's why he keeps having children.
Yes, that is true. I find out what flavour it is on Wednesday. For example. Actually, that reminds me. I need a favour. I'll ask you later. A couple of bits that I need you to bottle some whiskey on.
Yeah, you need a moil.
So I'm opening this because I figured this would be appropriate for you guys. I don't know if you got a chance to try it when it came out, but you got.
I've got a bottle sitting at Kilhoman, but I haven't tried it yet.
I don't know what you mean, Ollie. I have no idea what you're talking about. Kilhoman, never heard of it.
That brings me to my next question. What possible dirt did you have on Anthony Wills that got you that cast?
Geez.
Oh, let's grab that.
What have I done with it? There we go. It's always right beside me.
It's only annoying.
There it is. Sorry, let me move this Port Charlotte out.
It's only annoying because before you did that, there was only us in SNWS, and it was that was much easier to explain. There was only 2 of us. Now it's 3.
Yeah. What did?
So yeah.
How did that?
So we pitched up at the distillery, and we'd had some email exchange with Anthony, and then we pitched up at the distillery, and over the course of a meeting, he left the meeting. Anthony left the meeting saying, "Yeah, leave it with me. I'm sure we'll figure something out." And as we were driving away from the distillery, Joshua was saying, "Oh, can you believe he said we'll figure something out?" And I said, "Joshua, this is British code. This means you don't have a snowball's hell and chance of getting any of my whiskey." And Joshua said,
"I didn't understand it."
Right? And Joshua said, "I don't think that's what he. Yeah, I don't think that's what he meant at all." And it was one of those moments where Joshua, unfortunately, it turned out to be fortunately because it was good juice in the cask. But unfortunately, Joshua was proven correct that Anthony did have something in his mind that was kind of like, we could do this, we could make this work. The problem is, and Anthony's language is very similar to your language in asking the question, Anthony has said, "I've no idea what came over me when I said yes to that. I have regretted that every day since I said yes. Because do you know who calls me now for casks? Every single independent bottler. And they all say, Single Cask Nation did it. Why can't we do it? And so, yeah, to this, he regrets that decision to this day. And we get on just tickety-boo with him. And he seems to like us well enough, as much as Anthony likes anybody.
Is basically where you are. You have to get him in when he's had a chicken sandwich that's slightly dodgy, and then it's all works.
Yeah, I think he needs to have a full stomach. He's not thirsty. Everything, just the stars need to align perfectly, and it happens once a millennia.
So,
yeah. Well, that ship has sailed, unfortunately. Maybe we'll do it again. Maybe he'll have another weak moment at some point in the future.
So Brian's put a question in, which I think is to me, and I will answer that. I'd be interested, because I know you guys have done a few bottlings recently, and more importantly, through your obsessive whiskey buying, have tried many other casks without names on. How did you decide to declare the name still an expression?
I don't know what you're talking about, Ollie. I don't buy whiskey without
when
names
you're dealing
on
with
it.
brokers or parcels instead of distilleries. It came down to largely what's on the paperwork, or even with distilleries, what you've agreed. So, even for example, I bought stock not too long ago had a distillery name on the paperwork. So I have a first name and a second name, which was the distillery. I knew that it was supposed to be traded as a malt, but I also knew it was a single malt. So the first thing I did is I found a distiller, even though I didn't really deal with that. And I said, can you tell me what this is? They said, yes, single malt. And I said, okay, what do you want me to do? And they said, we would prefer you not to use the name. There's no contractual agreement. Because of that, I would never put it with Lefroy across the top. I would put it into Survivor or a scale, because that's what they've asked us to do, because it's a relationship game. So at the end of the day, if someone asks you to do something, you respect it. I don't always agree, because from my point of view as an independent bottler and as a customer, I believe independent bottlers build brands, and I genuinely think there's an awful lot of marketeers who have forgotten how much their brand owes to Gordon MacPhail, to Canheads, to Berries, etc., And I think, it's interesting having this conversation with you guys, because when I look in the US, and I was going to ask about this in a minute anyway, I enjoy bourbon, right? And it was really hard when I was working at Whisky Exchange to try and get single cask bourbon, single barrel bourbons for the Whisky Exchange. That was hard work. They just wouldn't do it for the UK. And now if I go to the States, I see every shop has their own barrel thing. And some of the shops
everywhere,
with us 20 barrels a month or whatever. But you guys have actually done independently bottled Wild Turkey, so your label, their name. Do the American distillers see the benefit you're getting, or is it a case of, how do you think that relationship
is? Scotland has such a rich heritage of independent bottling, where the independent bottler is keen to put the distillery name on the label, right? If you're a Lefroy drinker and independent bottlers, you're going to look for Lefroy, whether it's Cadden Heads or Single Malts of Scotland or exclusive malts or what have you. But in the US, that sort of independent bottling doesn't exist. And that's why you've got brands like High West, who buys a bunch of whiskey from MGP or Barton Distillery or who have you. Yellowstone, who buys a lot of Heaven Hill and puts that into bottle and etc. And so the tradition in the US is, we're a big distillery. You could buy whiskey from us and create the story you want around it. Oh, you've got a grandfather named Jebediah. Does he have a secret recipe you want to share? Right. That's just American whiskey has always been built on stories. True or not, it's always been built on stories or special names. Like, you've got Buffalo Trace that has brands like George T. Stagg and William LaRue Weller and all these. And it's a brand based on a story around a person. And so when you pitch up to the Wild Turkeys of the world or the Buffalo Traces of the world and you say, we'd love to bottle some of your whiskey, if they want to say yes at first, it's with the expectation that you would not be telling people where you got the whiskey from. But when you try to tell them, we want to bottle whiskey and tell people where it came from, because we want everybody to, we want to give credit where credit is due. And most American producers just don't. That's like putting, a square peg in a round hole for them. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work for them. And Jason and I have always been of the mind that as independent bottlers, we're stewards of that brand. We've got to do our best to show the best of that brand. And so for the most part, American distilleries just kind of look at us funny. But Wild Turkey has done a really good job. They see the value in independently bottled whiskey. We've worked with Heaven Hill. They saw the value in independently bottled whiskey. Westland is another distillery, Balcones. And we're we did a collaboration with Whistle Pig as well. So it's starting to grow, but it's still kind of difficult. It doesn't make sense to the American producer, the Scottish style of independent bottling.
Do you think it makes sense to the consumer?
Oh yeah,
I think it's starting to. So, let me use this example. So back in 2014, Jason and I bottled our very first MGP, and we put on at that time it was LDI, right? Lawrenceburg Distillers, Indiana. And we put LDI on the label. We put the full name on there. And so bourbon drinkers, rye drinkers knew that LDI/MGP makes whiskey for pretty much every brand out there. But it was verboten, no one put that on the label until we put it on the label. I was surprised that we were the first ones to do that. But then you start hearing more about how the American system works, and it makes sense. Anyway, that was 2014, and people were saying, what are you guys doing? This is crazy. I've never seen anyone mention the name. And now even MGP have their own brands. And now when they're doing their own single barrels for this shop or that shop, the MGP name is being thrown around everywhere. So I think American consumers are starting to see it. I think American producers are starting to understand that consumers appreciate transparency and information more nowadays than they do a good story.
but look also at how you started the question, Ollie, right? Retail stores have got their barrel picks. Like consumers are now to the point of knowing I can have the official lineup from the distillery, but I can also go and explore all of these single barrels. Now the question becomes, and I want to give the consumer credit here. The question becomes, does it need to be a single barrel as released by the official distillery, or can it be a barrel as released by an independent bottler? And clearly we're just in the beginning of the stages of an independent bottler being the one putting out the barrel in the United States. But the thing that Josh and I have said from day one of having Single Cask Nation in the United States is we are built in the Scottish tradition. And so we have really fought tooth and nail to bring that Scottish tradition to the distilleries of Kentucky, to the distilleries of Indiana, and then other single malts that we've done across the US. But there is definitely a consumer out there who is craving the exact same thing. Now the question just becomes, how many of those can we put together, and how successfully can we sell to them? But and then to go back to an earlier point that we had a podcast episode with Eddie Russell of Wild Turkey. And in interviewing Eddie talked about the value of working with an independent bottler. Eddie talked about the value of fresh eyes seeing his product. And so it was wonderfully refreshing to have somebody deeply entrenched in the Kentucky industry understand exactly what it is we're trying to achieve as independent bottlers in a Scottish tradition. And the hope is, if you can show that Eddie Russell and Wild Turkey are willing to do it, maybe somebody else will jump into the breach as well, and we'll start to expand these offerings and get to show other sides of these distilleries.
Very good. I've got a question that in a way is related to someone who was on our booth earlier, and it seems really apt for the Whisky Show just because of the amount of stuff going on with Waterford, and everyone's talking about Taiwan, they're talking about the nature of how you make whiskey, and kind of related to what we've just said in terms of transparency, right? Do you feel that the information, like the additional information that is requested all the time, whether that's down to the cask numbers you've used for a particular batch, or the yeast, the field you got your barley from, do you feel that is making for a better drinking experience? It's helping or hindering, or do you think it's actually, is it just white noise? Is it just more marketing?
I think that for 98% of the drinkers out there, it's white noise. Right? I think, we're discussing whiskey on a level that most people don't, because they just want something that tastes good in a glass, and maybe you toss it over some ice. And wait, you've got a single malt. Okay, wait, that's better, right? So I think the majority of consumers, if that information is available to them and they want to dig a little deeper because they've fallen in love with what's in their glass, then that's fantastic. And I think that information then becomes valuable should people want to use it, access it, dig a little deeper. For us, I think it's immensely vital. I want to know. I want to know all the facts, and I don't think that I'm alone there. So I don't think that. I think the facts should always be out there, and all the details be there for people to consume. But I would assume that the majority of people consuming, listen to all these words,
He's so proud
products
of himself right now.
It's white noise to them. I am
so
very proud of myself right now.
As soon as you used it the first time, I could see the glint in your eye. You were already getting excited about what you were doing over there.
I know. I know, and I worked up a sweat doing that.
Look at
Oof.
that. Yeah, to add on to it, we just had a recent episode of the podcast where, normally our introductions are just us talking about movies, but I asked Joshua the question, what is whiskey for? And the good Sam Simmons of that boutique whiskey company, and formerly Dr. Whiskey, maybe he still is Dr. Whiskey. He really dug that conversation. And I think it speaks to, if I'm sitting watching a movie, drinking a dram, I'll invariably get to a point where I'll stop watching the movie and I'll dive into the dram, and I'll start thinking to myself, what's going on in here? Is this good? How good is it? And I always ask myself the question, would I bottle this? If I'm drinking a single cask, would I bottle this? Mm-hmm. And then my question, what is whiskey for? Like, why am I doing that? Like, I think part of what whiskey's for is simply enjoying. And so to Joshua's point, you can enjoy it without knowing, the farmer's shoe size who planted the barley, right? Right? You can enjoy it, but there are definitely going to be moments when, people like ourselves, people who would actually listen to this conversation, are going to want access to as much information as possible. And I think it's spot on for them to have it. I would almost, go the other side where I've got more of a complaint than an appreciation. I'm still a good Scottish lad when I have a complaint. Any independent bottler who would tell you the single cask you're drinking was matured in oak, like, really? Like, come on, we've moved beyond that. And then the thing that Josh and I have realized in our time being in the business is sometimes the only thing you know is that the whiskey you're selecting was matured in oak. And sometimes you've got a battle on your hands to try and find out more cask information. And so I do wish there were standard practices on what we were being told about the things we're being offered, the things we're buying, the things we're tasting, the things we're releasing. That would be very useful. I definitely don't think you can have too much information. And if you want to consume it and assume it and quadrassume it and parassume it, I don't know. I'm not as good at this as Joshua is.
So I'm going to throw something against you then on your information. If
say that again.
To throw something up against your, because philosophy might as well debate. If you give a lot of information but not all of the information, and the bits you're missing are the bits that would actually help. So as an example, and not aiming at any particular company, if you were to say, okay, we've taken barley from X field, and that's what we've used for this bottling, and it tastes like X, and you can see that it's different. This bottling came from these other things, or barley with different strains, etc. But you've not talked about yeast varietal, and you've not talked about fermentation times, and you've not talked about the fact that you had to change your milling and your mashing to adjust so that you've got some form of similar yield, not necessarily the same. You're really doing the customer a service, because what you're actually saying, you're claiming that the barley is, in that case, is the most important thing, or you might be trying to claim the most important thing. What you're not pointing out is all of the other aspects of your process that you are tweaking and changing to get a consistent product, or to get at least consistent yield. I think it's kind of what you said, Jason, because there's no set rule book on this. The problem is, by giving what seems like a lot of information, you can actually be very misleading very quickly if you're not also handing out all the other tiny bits and explaining why those tiny bits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think the thing we're always going to run into is that every single whiskey, every single distilled product is spatially, temporally disparate, right? And the fact that we would attempt to put any kind of parameters on that is always going to be a fool's errand, right? However, as human beings, the only thing we can really try to do is have some approximation of precision. And so I think that's all any producer, any distiller, any independent bottler is doing, is trying to present information. Are you right that it would ultimately be incomplete? 100%, 100%. But we're never going to have access to every single finite story that exists, and that's true of anything we're doing in life. And so I think we're okay understanding that you're being presented with a lot of details, but it's not the whole picture, and you're not going to understand the whole picture from that set of details, but at least you know the farmer's shoe size, right?
But if it's a leathery whiskey, it makes a lot of difference, obviously. If it's a leathery whiskey, then it would make a big difference.
A leathery whiskey. I was thinking more rubbery, to be honest.
we walk in very different circles, Jim.
But from the perspective of label information, so I agree with you both. I think essentially we may be saying, if not the same thing, similar things, in that let's have a baseline amount of information that will at least give the consumer what they want. And if to the producer it's barley type, yeast type, fermentation time, cask type, then that's fine, right? That's all well and good. The people in the mezcal world quite often do stuff like this, where here's all the information that they want to share with their consumers, and it gives you all of the details. And so I quite like that. I like the idea of having just some sort of baseline amount of information that we would put on our labels. And so what we do for us is simply cask type, how long it was in that cask, distillation date, bottling date, tasting notes, ABV, where it came from, right? That is just a good bit of information for people to read while they're sipping on their whiskey or their rum. And then we'll throw this on there for people who don't like to read too many things, just a quick visual of where the flavors are. And that gets back to the original comment was of what is whiskey for? Maybe it's just for enjoying. And if you want to know just a little bit to help you purchase that bottle, is it too sweet? I don't want a sweet whiskey. I want a smoky whiskey, right? And so we try to give these tools to consumers to let them make their best decision. And
are you on rum now?
Yeah, that's it.
It turned up.
All right.
Yes.
I had,
Oh, yes.
That was going to be my next one.
Very bad job. You're a very bad friend. He's missing out because of you.
Yeah, right. So if you're saying for Port Escaig, they just back up the Kalila truck and you make a whiskey. Talk about the challenges of black tot rum. What are you working on?
The challenges of rum are, in the first place, it's rum. For me, that's a challenge. It's funny, isn't it? Because I've worked with whiskey literally my entire professional life, I'll say adult life, but I'm pretty sure the first few years I was definitely not being very adult about it. I'm not sure I'm that adult about it now.
Yeah.
And whiskey's also a hobby, right? It's what I love. It's what I do it. I worked in a whiskey shop because I figured that was a lot cheaper than just buying whiskey, because this way I get to drink some and open bottles for tastings and stuff. Rum was something that I remember having a lot of fun with when I was at university, but I couldn't tell you an awful lot about what I was drinking. I tried to approach it as a category a few times to kind of learn a bit more, but I actually find it's still quite an intimidating category. Actually, due to, very similar to what we just said, they don't have kind of base level of information because there are so many rules. And there's a misnomer about rum that it's to do with the fact there's no rules. That's not true. The problem is there's so many rules in so many different categories in so many different countries. And suddenly when you've got all of these different rules all competing with each other, it's kind of like Scotch whiskey, bourbon whiskey, Irish whiskey, you put all that together and suddenly you've got an awful mess. Trying to explain to someone in the US, for example, why their 2-year-old whiskey cannot be sold in Europe as whiskey, that's a challenge. Well, rum's like that on steroids. So my first challenge was to understand the category, which I still don't feel I have done. I've understood flavour, which is, I think, relatively easy for pretty much everyone. Like, you like something, you don't like something. Why do you like it? There's a relatively simplistic questions that even my son can get on, will tell me what he likes and doesn't like. And then in terms of putting it together, that was both incredibly enjoyable. We basically started from a base like we do everything. We started just getting out other people's product. I'm a great believer that you learn by drinking what other people do, right? That's, if you're not drinking other people's stuff, you will have no concept of whether you're doing a good job. You'll have no concept of what good is. What's the film that's in? It's a terrible term. You can't smell your own shit. I mean, that's basically that's basically where I sit.
You haven't been to my bathroom, Ollie.
Yeah. Did you say you had to quote a film? You had to quote a film on that? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not trying other stuff, you can't learn about it. So we laid out all of the rums we could find, and I don't want to be doing anyone a disservice when I say this. This isn't a criticism, but as a category, what I found for myself was that the majority of rums were very good, but they didn't have the layers of flavour that I find in whiskey. They didn't have the journey in a glass. Like for instance, so I poured that when we chatted before. It's lovely, by the way. It's, you know, Joshua, when you get your bottle from Durham, you'll very much enjoy it. But it's changed from when I first tried it. So when I first opened it, it was kind of that almost mezcal-y kind of greenness to it. You could tell there's young whiskey in there. But now that's kind of settled down, and there's a little bit more of those kind of toffee notes coming through, and it's just a bit round, a bit thicker. I found for myself with rum that a lot of the rums have kind of one focus point in terms of flavour profile. They went in one direction. Sometimes that was an extreme direction, like you try Hatton, it's very extreme. And that wasn't, as a category, that made it quite challenging. But from a blending point of view, that's kind of interesting because everything's now quite obvious, right? It's like using your spice cutter, there's a lot of obvious flavours. So Black Top Finest Caribbean, we've used essentially 4 different styles of rum in there from 3 different places. And from a blending point of view, in some ways it's quite easy, right? You're literally saying, okay, I want that licorice note, I want that weight that I associate with Lusk and Simon, our first ever Black Top, which is the old Navy stock, the actual Navy stock, and it's got that licorice note to it. I like fruity whiskey, I like fruity rums, right? I also think I like stuff that's fairly easy to drink. If I'm honest, deep down, I like to chug, you know, try to drink, be able to. And all the distilleries.
Please chug.
Yeah, absolutely. Whiskey show. Chug. Of all the rums I've ever found that did that, Foursquare. Right? Foursquare is infinitely drinkable as a rum. And the Dawley's range is great, kind of drinkable rums.
I was just looking at my Foursquare shelf over here. Agreed with you, Ollie. Agreed.
Similarly, like talking about the brands, Eldorado. I loved Eldorado because of the density. So it's going back to that. We wanted that in our rum, and then the last thing is fruit. So you know, as whiskey fans, there's a lot of people, including myself, are quite obsessed with, say, Longmorn from the late 60s, early 70s, and Bowmore from a similar period. Where they're very fruit driven. I mean, Longmorn at 69 essentially tastes like grapefruit, and that's all about the yeast, right? That's a whole brewer's journey right there that's been concentrated. And I always say that if you like Longmorn 69, go and drink Hatton, because these things are not the same, but these things are in a similar camp. They're extreme fruit flavors. So Hatton or Worthy Park. I think we used Worthy Park for Finest Caribbean. The actual putting the stock together is very different to whiskey. So whiskey you buy from hundreds of distilleries, and sometimes you buy blended components just as pre-blends, but largely you can buy from distilleries and buy on stock for years and then put it in the wood you want and marry it. In the rum world, there's essentially one big broker, one guy with all the keys. And he, you know, there's a company, their job is providing bulk blend rum. And by that, I don't mean like it's all blends of different countries. It'll be like Barbados, 3-year-old, Barbados, 5-year-old, and style. And he's got thousands of styles, all in that they can call from at any time. He's creating those blends, right, so that you can have consistency. That was actually very freeing for me. It's the equivalent of being a painter, right, and having to make your own paint, which is kind of what you do in whiskey, right? And to be a painter who just runs along to the shop and buys 4 or 5 different colours pre-made for you that have particular styles. And that's kind of how I see ski, and it's kind of how I see Finest Caribbean. I went along and said, these are the flavoured camps I want, these are the kind of things I want. He then put something together. We went back, tried it, took it apart, put it back together, took it apart 27 odd times. I think I drove him slightly insane. But your kind of core ingredients, those core ingredients are set. Does that make sense? The one way about,
yeah, like you're going to work with those four, so you're not looking at others. It's how are we going to put these four together? Got it.
And we've been buying a lot of bulk stuff to stash away. Because I'm very lucky. My boss was hopefully not on the school anymore. While I'm nice about him, he allows me the freedom to go and experiment as long as I've got a good reason, as long as I'm happy to explain what we're doing. And basically, we're buying all sorts of bits so that in the future we can be a bit more risky about it. And in fact, that's how we ended up with this, which I really can't wait for you guys to try. So this is the Black Dot 50th anniversary. Joshua's tried it.
Oh, what?
I cannot. You have outdone yourself with this, Ollie. This is remarkable rum. Absolutely compelling and remarkable.
I understand, that's fine.
No, that's just the added bonus. That's just the added.
The nice thing for me was this was kind of bearing on whiskey blending in terms of the scale that we're at as a company. You know, you're talking about 3 casks of that, 4 casks of this, 5, so small, so you can, it was also free. We could just, not free, it wasn't free, it was very expensive, but we could, to some degree, blend the kind of styles we wanted. We could go and find different parcels and then take from that together. To the extent that when I got most of the way down the blending routes, the Kinder was like, yeah, it's, I wanted to have, he said, I wanted to have that kind of earth floor kind of aerated thing that you get from last consignment. I just sat there going, we could just put some flagons in it, so we did it. And then I wanted to have that kind of old bitterness, that good really old rum. It's like, we've got that, Demijohn, a 42-year-old Demerara rum. We could pour them around, we could just stick that in it. Yeah, we'll do that. So it's a lot of fun putting it together, and I am proud of the liquid. But the thing that I love, and the thing, this is kind of going back to what we're talking about transparency. The regulations in whiskey are so geared up in a way so the consumer only knows, right, the stuff that's uncontroversial, essentially, right? Any which way you look at it is to protect against exactly what I said, people using information to sell their bottle without clarification. And in rum, you don't have that. And that allowed us to do this and just put every single ingredient on the back of the label with every percentage and every age. And whiskey, in Scotch whiskey, they'd be saying, well, you're trying to sell this as a 42-year-old whiskey. And I'd be going, no, I've written it's only got 0.5% of that in this. I've told them exactly how little I use. And for those people wondering, it does make a difference. Like 0.5% is, oh yeah, it's a world of change.
Does it?
It really is absolutely incredible.
Do you find, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you are doing blending with whiskeys, do you find that same 0.5% with whiskey makes as big a difference as it does in rum?
Profile of the blend and what you're using, right? So if you've got something that's very light, I like crisp, say you've got a batch of liquid, and then you just throw 0.5% of Lagavulin in it, you will taste it 100% all day.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Some of your component parts are pretty extreme. So the example of this, and we did this blend twice in the end because we screwed up. As I've been talking about screwing up and bottling all weekend, because I think everyone should know the mistakes you make. You should revel in them, and then revel in the victories that come after you fix them. With this, there was a mistake of the bottling ball when it first went to be battered, and they accidentally, because we sent too much stock up, because I had another plan for it, they accidentally dumped twice as much Hamden as they were supposed to. Yeah. And the problem
All the
was
esters.
I couldn't go back and I couldn't buy like twice as much of everything else, right? That wasn't a feasible plan. So what we ended up doing was reblending it. So I took that blend that they made from it, and then I ended up looking back at the component parts we had and reworking it and seeing where I got to. And I think we got to a better place in the end, but we ended up with about a third extra stock. And we'd already ordered all that kind of pack stuff. We decided on a lot of that, apart from the recipe on the back label, like everything else was done. And so we sat there afterwards going, okay, what we're going to do. And of course, Black Top comes from the Navy tradition of blending, but also continuous blending. So they would fill a vat full of rum, they'd empty it to a third, they'd fill it back up, they'd empty it to a third, there's always a third left in. And we thought, you know what, that's quite well. What we'll do is we'll recast our blend into refill sherry butts. And then next year, when we're doing our Navy strength, because we're going to do a Navy strength every year, we'll use that as the base. And we'll top up from there, create what we want, keep a third, go on to the next year, keep a third, go on to the next year. So we've got a little bit of Navy tradition in there and a little bit of history, but also it's a little bit of fun in terms of seeing how it develops and seeing how our palate develops. Because going back to what we did at the very start, consistency in whiskey isn't really a thing. Consistency in rum, I don't really think is a thing in terms of standard bottle. Over years they change, over decades they change. There are very few whiskies I think you can look at, you say are consistently the same over the course of 20, 30 years. And I think that's probably true of rum as well. And I like the fact that we're going to just revel in the fact that we're changing the blend with people. You know, it's a drink. People are, so we'll change it with people with their taste.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll want a third of Hamden in everything we do in the future. You never know.
Who doesn't?
But you know what? But of course that would put it out of balance. And this is one of the things that I've always liked about, and this is me making you uncomfortable again, Ollie. One of the things I've always liked about your whiskeys is that there's always going to be balance seems to be the backbone to your whiskeys, whether it's Port Ascaig or the single malt of Scotland bottlings. It's always really well balanced. And so if you put out something that had a third more Hampton in there, as interesting as it would be, I would say this doesn't seem like an Ollie.
I'm not a lover of interesting
product.
whiskey, as you two well know. Interesting whiskey is, that's what you throw up in someone's house with the first time you've been to it. Almost really.
You do it one time. Wow, you do it one time. It's so close at all times.
This is I love telling the story. It is so bad.
Here's the original sample that I think that's what you were drinking at Joshua's house. Not drinking, that's what we forced upon you.
No.
Did you pour it from Inferno?
I poured from this. Yeah.
Oh,
I poured
this is the one that I pour people when I need them to leave my house. For anybody not familiar, this was a Tabasco cask, as it says down here. Tabasco cask from the Westland Distillery. And it's mental. It smells like blue cheese. Look at that. It completely destroyed the cork. And I just leave it like that because I really have no interest in opening it. So this protects me from myself. But yeah, this blue cheese on the nose, and then just kind of it's a little bit spicy on the palate, but it's generally just horrific. And so then they turned it into the April Fool's release was Inferno. And so Inferno is this. And Godspeed to anybody who has it forced upon themselves late at night in Connecticut.
Well, anyway, it could have been
our first meeting.
That whole trip had a lot of firsts for me. First time That's my life keeping a car.
Yeah. Hey, Ollie, you seem pretty cool. Here's something disgusting.
Now, out of interest, Joe, before we sign off, which we don't have to, I don't really understand how it works, but I think we're supposed to finish at 9, but until it closes, I'm just going to stay on. Out of interest, World Whiskies, you obviously bottle US and have done. We've got, or we had, I don't know if he's still here, maybe he is, Sam Simmons on, who's been bottling all sorts of wonderful World Whiskies, one of which I tried to taste. It's actually stunning. I'm really funny, like obviously we have, we can go out and buy casks from distilleries around the world. In fact, we own, Ashok is definitely not listening, we own the oldest cask of amber in the world. We're currently playing chicken with him on who's going to bottle first. It's interesting, he's quite the same age, so it's like some kind of horrendous game. Every time I see him, he asks me, and I'm like, yeah, well, what do you know, when you're bottle yours?
Outturn of one bottle.
But we've not really gone into that market. Like we have some bourbon that we will bottle hopefully next year. That'll be very interesting. And I have some very good friends who own distilleries. Like, you know, obviously I've got some very good friends in England who own some very good distilleries who I'm talking to about buying stuff from, more just because I like them. I don't have no idea whether I bottle it or not. Just buy the stock and I'll drink it. And there are a couple of people overseas that I've got a lot of time for, such as Patrick and Sudan, who I think isn't yes. Bottling world whiskies, do you think for an independent bottler that is the future? Do you think it's something you want to do more of? Or is it a fad that Sam is just doing because, you know, he's the fan? I really hope he's here, otherwise me making
He was. I saw him enter a little bit ago, but
questions for Jason.
He
and
may
Joshua
have left
that
once he
wind
heard
up
his name
Sam
invoked.
Simmons. This is what
I'd invite him in to join into the conversation.
Is it a fad? No, absolutely not. Is it the future for all of us? No, absolutely not. As we are servicing those, you know, geeky whiskey fanatics perched on one end of the spectrum, it's just going to be the case of exploring the entire gamut. And so, you know, look how much you and I and we and you discuss rum, right? Rum is clearly going to pay the bills sooner rather than later, which is going to be really good. And so it's going to be rum, it's going to be Scotch, it's going to be world single malts, it's going to be American bourbons and rye.
Mezcal.
It's definitely going to be mezcal. We're looking at cognacs, armagnacs. You know, there's just I really feel now that those who are uber geeky in whiskey are not just single category focused, and I think they're really, you know, casting the net between the hare and the cat. And the swinging chair, the swiveling chair, and so I think it's the whole run, Ollie, and look how, you know, diversified you are, and your stocks are. Like it's going to be dabbling in all of it, but I think Scotch will continue to pay the bills for all of us. But I think rum is going to do a lovely job for us sooner rather than later, which has been Dave Broom's call to arms for 3 decades. At some point, we're going to get paid off the back of Dave Broom's prediction.
Yeah, well, you know, we had to make him right at some point. Otherwise, you know, be that embarrassing moment. Wrong. Oh,
Yeah, you can't be wrong if you just see it's coming. Like, there's no time stamp.
I'd love to know what your opinion on this. I did a load of sampling on rum for single casks a couple of weeks ago. Of some really old stock. Like, so it's a whole range of different distillates, different countries, different distillates, different still types, all the rest. the youngest rum was 1997, and the oldest was probably 1980. And actually, I really struggled, if I'm brutally honest. I found absolutely nothing that I wanted to buy. I found a couple that were interesting, possibly usable in terms of blending, but a single cask rum, just they weren't drinks. They were experiences. Although I fully understand some people want to sell experiences, I kind of leave that to Disneyland. I'm selling drinks. I'm not into this. Oh well, it was an interesting product and people bought it. So they could say, "Oh, I drank this stupid high ester 30-odd pound."
Sure.
Do you find when you're trying rum samples, it's as easy to find rum you like, good rum you like, as whiskey?
I'll say my small bit. Jason might have a slightly longer answer to that.
Normally how it works.
One of the things, yeah, I know, but I'm going to try to keep it short.
One of us is a bit shorter, the other one's a bit lengthier.
Anyway,
Paging HR.
So yeah, totally. So I think with rum, one of the things that I found more often, and I think, Ollie, this is venturing into what you were saying, is we'll taste rum samples and it seems quite clear that may be a component, right? Rather than a full rum, right? It would go well with something else, right? So those experiences you've had may be fun in and of themselves, but marry them with 2 or 3 other things, and now you've got something that's actually enjoyable and less interesting, right? So there's that aspect of it. The biggest aspect for me when it comes to rum and picking casks is mouthfeel. Rum typically doesn't seem to have that big unctuous mouthfeel that we look for when we're doing malt whiskeys or bourbons or mezcal or what have you. And I don't know if that's, a product of the fermentation or distillation, or the fact that it's, cane based or molasses based rather than a grain. I don't fully understand why, but I think I find picking rum harder because whatever I'm drinking needs to have a really good mouthfeel. And it's hard to find a really good mouthfeel in rum unless you're adding just a shit ton of sugar in there,
just before
something
you
like
ask,
that.
Jason, have you ever tried rum from Hayati? Have you ever tried Clara?
Yep.
Yeah, that's good mouthfeel. I mean, that's good stuff. To be fair,
That's a really good mouthfeel.
I hadn't got there first. I could see myself independently bottling all of that. Yeah, all day.
Yeah, we had a cask selected for release that got sold out from under us, and that's, you talk about regrets. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. So, I'd go on record as saying this. I didn't like rum for the longest time. And so in exploring the category through samples and then kind of buying up along the way to supplement that, I'm really enjoying and really quite excited by the rum category. And I'm enjoying how different it is and how far outside my comfort zone it is. And the thing that I've talked with Joshua about for years and years is that I'm a Scotch whiskey guy through and through. It's easily my first passion. It's easily my biggest passion. But as we're exploring mezcals and rums and Armagnac and so on and so forth, I'm becoming a little disappointed, and I'm going to speak very honestly with everybody in the room here. I think the quality of samples that we're generally seeing across the Scotch world is diminishing. And one of the things that we kind of alluded to earlier in this conversation is that so many of the casks we're currently purchasing need to be reworked in some way, re-racked in some way, whereas the rums that are coming across our desk seem ready to go and seem much more interesting and much more fascinating than a lot of the Scotch samples that are coming across our desk. And that's got me excited about that world. And releasing those for the nation is fun. And I'm kind of, I was alluding to it earlier, where I really think whiskey fans, whiskey nerds, are really interested in category hopping right now. And I think as we, Single Cask Nation, come up to somebody and say, hey, check out this rum, check out this Foursquare, I think you're going to quite like it. And having them say, wow, that really is fascinating. That's exciting to me. And that gives me hope that as Single Cask Nation, just independent bottlers, not independent bottlers of Scotch whiskey, there's so much room to play in there that, yeah, I'm happy with the category. I'm excited by the category, and long may it continue.
Good. Well, boys, we have 14 minutes left. I mean, we can fit a whole nother question. If you want to do a question,
yeah. What do we want? I'm doing. Oh, there we go. Look at that. What time, Steph? I'm definitely. Yeah. On October 7th,
I want to join that.
Billy Abbott is doing grain whiskey, and so I've got that on my schedule. If Steph's doing whiskey versus mezcal, 7 p. to when? When, Steph? When? I know it's only
she said 7 p.m.
But
I wanted to be 7
Tuesday,
p.m. 7 p.m. every day.
Okay, Tuesday at 2 p.m. our time. Okay. We have an interview. Oh, we're doing a session. We've got battling sessions, Steph.
Oh, we do. Yeah, we'll be with the milk and honey people.
Okay, that's a bummer to miss it.
Oh, well.
Yeah, well, here's the question then. Rum and having difficulty with some of those samples that came across your desk. What are you most excited about right now, Mr. Oliver Chilton?
No, I'm not. I mean, I like
going forward. I mean,
I like Glentoff, but it's not exciting interesting. I think I've actually really struggled. Like this whole year, obviously everyone struggled this year. The thing that's really got me is that where in a normal year I would be out and about, at least part of my job is going out, right? It's going out to shows and going to different markets and having a jolly to Japan and whatnot. And I've not had my same involvement with bars, with pubs, with drinking. I've just drank at home. And I think I actually said to Judy the other day, one of the struggles that ends up happening is I don't have my I don't end up with the same kind of passion for things because I only buy what I want to drink. Right? I'm like the word. You guys you practice what you preach. You buy a lot of everything, try everything. Yeah, I am not a good human being. I do not practice, although I will tell people they should try everything. I largely just buy Lagavulin, Springbank for more. When I did a Desert Island Dram session the other day, and I realised that my first list was all Islay, and then my second list was all peated apart from one whiskey. I mean, it's just in my home drinking, I'm not that flexible. So in terms of work, I guess what I'm looking forward to, or what I'm enjoying right now, is actually almost what you said. I love the Scotch whiskey that's coming across my desk because there's work to do. I love
that's a good
the
answer.
fact there's so much stock. Like in my entire career, I've never been in the point in the industry where I had so much access to different stuff. And although some of it doesn't have a name, you've got to be a bit more creative about how you bottle it and how you sell it and how you talk about it. I actually think in some ways it's almost a golden era for independent bottling, because the access is increasing. Yes, you can't buy Ardbeg and you can't buy Lafroig and you can't buy Clyndish. You can buy Clyndish, but you can't buy like all of the crazy stuff that you could have bought. She can come in and swear at us, Joshua. It's fine. But what you can do is you can buy all these distilleries that lots of people haven't heard of, and you can shine a light on them. And you can. There's more and more companies as kind of takeovers have happened. Like Stuart Buchanan's in the room. My hope is that we, at some point, Brown Forman down there and be like, yeah, you know what, we should really get into the kind of brokering out casks of Glendronach and Benriach market. Maybe Ollie would like some new help. And as those companies change and develop, there's more opportunities for us to have more fun. And I'm still very I'm still think there's so much room for growth in Scotch whisky. I still think there's so much room to bring people into the category. I'm obviously biased, but I do believe as a category it's the one with the best longevity. Because I think once you're obsessed with it, that's it. It will never leave you. You know, other spirits are fads. You know, other spirits you go through times with them, like gin. Everyone's had a time with gin, and then they realise 12 by 10 green, or Beefeater, and then they've gone back to that. Whereas whiskey is with you forever, and it's a journey, a continuous journey of flavour. So that's probably the most exciting thing for work. At home, I've just been buying books on Calvados. I don't know why, but I like Calvados. So I've been buying books on Calvados.
Okay.
And,
Interesting.
buying bottles of Calvados. And I'm trying desperately to convince anyone in the company to listen to me to go, I could go out to bottle Calvados. While they're all quite rightly pointing out to me, it will be really hard to sell. I'm like, yeah.
When's that
I
ever
mean,
stopped?
eventually they'll give up and let me do it, and then in 10 years' time, when it's really easy to sell, I'll be a genius, because that's what's happening. Unintentional purchasing of stuff. I remember I always think, I look at our Isla stocks now, and I think back to 2004, 2005, and working in a whiskey shop and trying to sell, Bowmore, Lafroig, Ardbeg. And yeah, you had fans of those whiskies that bought those whiskies, but Joe Public, who came in our shop, which was a tourist shop, we sold to tourists, and like, would you like? We used to have Elixir in our cask in the shop, and we used to have to sell this Elixir, and it was all about trying to push the Elixir in the shop, right? And you're like, well, try this. Yeah, it tastes kind of like tires and dirt. Yeah, it kind of gives you the impression of being whipped by someone really enthusiastically with leather, and somehow they wouldn't buy it. It just wasn't flying off. However, now if I bottle a check, it will literally disappear. So I kind of look at our stock now and think it's either saw the future or got very lucky, because it's like, well, clearly one day there will be loads of mental cases who really want their check. Therefore, we should do lots of that.
Yeah.
So maybe Calvados is going to be that thing. Maybe.
And I think that's the thing, and I think why it's so easy for us to keep looking backwards is that the history's already been written, and you can go back and you can say either we got that part right, or we got that part wrong, or geez, I never thought that part would ever amount to anything. In looking forward, there's so much on the table that could potentially happen, that could potentially go right, but also so much that could potentially amount to nothing. And it's so very difficult to get that aspect
interesting point
correct.
That we can finish on. If you go back to 2004, 2005, 2006, that kind of period, and you look at what the big boys, the big companies all did, they all believe firmly that India, like I remember all the news articles about India buying whiskey, India's going to be buying whiskey. In China, this was the future. Now, China obviously does buy an awful lot of whiskey, but they all firmly believed it would be premium blend. And you can sit there and say, well, they got it wrong, because at the moment, premium blend isn't a thing in China. Unless you're Johnny Walker, it's not really working for you. And even then, you're moving to malts, like the whole business is moving to malts. So you go, well, that's a big mistake, and it's something that never happened. What a shame. What I love is, as an independent bottler, is I'm currently buying like 1980 blend, which is definitely going to be some kind of fancy, famous grouse for India or China, and I get to bottle it as a single cask and sell tons of it to Taiwan, who love it because it tastes really good. So I think that those things going forward, those challenges, the things that don't happen, that's actually the opportunities. That's where we're really going to have some fun and make some noise.
I love it, Ollie. I love your and I don't mean this in any negative way. I love the optimism that you bring to it, where you are turning the upside down right way up again. I really like your perspective on the industry.
Well, every giant company lost $1 million. There's a small company who stole it from them.
I tell you, Jason never gives me compliments for being optimistic at all. So I'm gonna have to.
You're optimistic all the time, Joshua. I've set myself up. Everyone thinks I'm a negative bastard. What they don't know is deep down.
See?
Okay.
This guy gets it.
Deep down, I'm grumpy.
Turn that faucet off.
Right then, we're coming to the end of our session.
Thank you, sir.
Very much, Jen, for spending the last hour and a half or 2 hours we've spent chatting. It was quite nice to listen to all of you. It was different to our last one. Nobody killed any birds, and
of the feathered, winged variety.
The police could not look in at the ridiculous structure of the front of a car, going, "What are they doing?"
You can't say you don't have fun with us.
Exactly. It was so great giving you a heart attack on our first week together, Ollie.
Yeah, I bet that was sad. Before we go, we're going to head over to the Elixir Distillers booth. If anyone wants to join us, where it'll be kind of free for all, chat, drink, make sarcastic comments being mean to probably me. So that's the way things are. So we will see you all there in a couple of minutes. Cheers.
Cool. Cheers, Ollie.
All right, now it's just the two of us with everybody.
So who's our next guest, Joshua?
Oh my gosh!
You would think the guy who was hosting it would be the guy who would actually close down
he left us on here.
The interview, and we wouldn't all just have to
gosh,
shuffle out here ourselves.
Julie's popping in. She's gonna lay the law down. I think we'll have to get out, Jason. Oh, we're supposed to do something naughty.
We could add her. Look. Ollie
Julie.
left. Ollie just left and
Can't get
left
the
us in
staff these
charge.
days. The hosts. I mean, what's going on? You would think that you would wait until you were away, but that's fine.
So we could start the real conversation now, Julie.
Yeah,
Ollie was
we can start the party now. I think we've got about 30 seconds left. If we go over to the Elixir Distillers stand, we'll be able to do this. So I'll see you.
Perfect. We'll see you there.
Good to see you, Julie.